He sort of introduced this like new evidence. And my trial partner, he said it was like I hit a Super Mario star or something when he said it, because I changed my whole closing and went with a theme, basically, if you don't stop them, they'll do it again. If you don't stop them, they'll do it again. And it was a lot of fun for me. I was very passionate, very mad about these people because they continue to defraud people. I imagine that they're still doing it today, to be honest. So
you've sort of found yourself into this fraud niche. How do you market that? I mean, is it through the good verdicts? Or are you out there saying, hey, if you have a fraud case, send it to me? How do people know, hey, it's a fraud case, Jon David's our guy?
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This is a podcast where I get to talk to founding and managing attorneys and law firm owners and hear about their journeys and how they've built their firm and all the cool stuff they're doing. This week's guest is a friend of mine, Jon David Huffman. He is an attorney at Poole Huffman. That firm has undergone some tremendous growth over the last, decade or so, maybe longer. I know when I first met Jon David and his partner years ago, it was a fledgling little firm, and now it's a gigantic firm. So we're going to get into all of that. So Jon David, thanks for coming on, man.
yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here. It's a real honor to be on your podcast, man. You got one of the best ones in the country, so I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Oh man, you're going to make me blush here. Thank you. All right, so Jon David, so let's talk about, I guess first let's talk about your firm. So Poole Huffman, how long has it been around? I know you guys are, I guess in Atlanta you might be considered mid-sized. I don't know, but you're becoming a pretty big firm. So tell me about what your firm does and sort of the stats now. How many attorneys, how many employees, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my partner started the firm about 17 years ago. I joined him actually when I was in law school. He'd been around for 6 months or a year. So right as my 1L year opened up, I don't know if they still do it, but back then they wouldn't let you work till second semester. And I went out and got a little part-time job with him. And I've been working with him ever since. We partnered up 11 years ago, a little over 11 years ago. I made it Poole Huffman then. So, yeah.
Well, you've been there since the beginning, so I would say you're a founder. You're a founder.
Okay, cool. I got to be on the podcast, but technically he's the founder. But we're approaching 40 people, a little over 20 attorneys at the moment. Excited about our growth. We do business litigation, real estate litigation, a lot of fraud-based litigation. I like to tell people that I represent people that have been defrauded, and conned, and deceived. In those contexts, so real estate, business, intellectual property sort of context is where we take place.
Yeah, so you do a lot of fraud cases. So if you had to pick a niche, would you say sort of disputes involving fraud is sort of your niche? Is that what you call it?
That's my niche, absolutely.
And so how did you get into that? How do you get into sort of the fraud lane? I mean, I know in business litigation, it seems like there's always an allegation of that, but you're saying this is what I do, and I know you try a lot of cases, and we'll talk about a couple of the cases that involve some of these allegations of fraud, but how did you get into that?
Well, a little bit serendipitous. The first jury trial I ever did involved, I like to tell the story like this. Imagine two guys with a briefcase full of $80,000 on their way to New York, and the expectation is they're going to get it to New York and exchange it for $3 million. And that was the start of my first trial and really my first fraud case. I had two clients and they were defrauded by two friends of theirs in what was really a souped up sort of Nigerian email scheme. I don't know if those are real popular anymore, but there was some sort of overseas inheritance and they needed the $80,000 for transfer fees and tax stamps and other sort of nonsense. But they were both very sophisticated. And we wound up in front of Judge Randy Rich over in Gwinnett County. That was my first jury trial ever. So that was my first taste of it. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. The idea of getting somebody on the stand and cross-examining them for being dishonest. sort of walk through that process. And we actually got an apology out of the guy on the stand in that case. It was sort of my first taste of that, and kind of been doing it ever since.
I was going to ask, what kind of business deal where you travel across the country with 80,000 in cash and all of a sudden you come back with 3 million? Sign me up, man. That sounds like an awesome deal.
That's what I thought too. Yeah, and that's the thing about fraud. People get pulled into these sort of circumstances that you step back from them for a moment and go like, this is ridiculous. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But the human element of it is what traps people. The cons were one of my client's neighbor for 9 years, his literal next door neighbor. They used to tell me that, they flick each other off during the case. It was kind of comical. And then the other client had a 9-year relationship with like in a fraternity, like an adult, like fraternity with this guy. So they knew each other well. And that is what happens in these cases.
So let me ask this about, the types of jury trials you do versus, let's say, some of the personal injury. I've talked to a lot of personal injury trial lawyers over the years, and for many of them, one of their, guiding principles is let's get the trial over as quickly as possible. We don't want to waste the jury's time. Get in and out, day and a half, boom, we're done. Maybe med-mal, go 1 or 2 weeks. These business cases, I mean, they're complex. Oftentimes there's lots of documents and emails, probably multi-day, sometimes multi-week trials. I guess the first question is, how do you keep the jury interested in these kind of cases?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've gotten that one before. I have not found it to be very difficult. There's an element about a fraud case when you stand up in the opening and you say, all right, I'm putting on this fraud case. This is what's happening. That's sort of like a Netflix trailer or something. I mean, people sort of have an interest in true crime and, these fraud stories that are on Netflix. And so all of a sudden you sort of describe it to them. Now, not to say we haven't lost some interest, I'm sure, along the way at some point in the trials, especially when you try to get into the documents. You have to walk through things. It gets a little monotonous, but I try to move through those fast. I try to train the lawyers to get through it fast. And for the most part, juries find it interesting because it's about deceit. So in the cross-examinations and even the direct examinations, you're trying to draw out the deceit, the intent, maybe in order to win, you really have to prove sort of a multiplicity of lies in the fraud case. You have to prove that they are a liar is really what you have to do to prevail. And the juries find it pretty interesting. Not that they want to be there. I mean, they'd rather be somewhere else. But once it gets going, they settle into it. That's been my experience.
So I saw the headline of an article in our local, I get the emails for our local legal, newspaper. I can't remember the headline exactly, but it was basically jury decides to quadruple the verdict after seeing the defendant's shoes or something like that. I can't remember exactly. So that was your case, right?
It was my case, yes.
All right, so I got to hear the story. It was behind a paywall, so I didn't get to see what it was about the shoes. So tell me.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little background on the case. So we represented somebody who had a relatively small judgment for the kinds of cases that we litigated. It was $66,000 against the company. And the owners of the company had just plundered the company, transferred everything out of it, played a bunch of shell games back and forth, what we would call like a fraudulent transfer for the lawyers listening. And so that was the trial. It was a fraudulent transfer. They took the $66,000 amount, and it turned out to be $282,000 at the end. In talking to the jury, this is where the shoes comes in. Afterwards, one of the jurors said she was very offended because the defendant got up really during the main case and cried poverty, but especially during the punitive damages phase, and just said, I don't have any money. And we had some evidence. I mean, we had evidence like he'd gotten $200,000 in the last 4 months of, this year. But she said, he was wearing Louis Vuitton shoes. And she was just really offended that he would get up there and say, I don't have any money, and yet at the same time be wearing expensive shoes. To be honest, I don't know how expensive they are. It's not really my style, but I looked it up, maybe $400 or $500 to a few thousand, so.
Well, let that be a lesson. Any attorneys out there, if your client is going to, plead poverty, you can't wear the Rolex, you can't wear the Louis Vuitton shoes. You got to wear just, ragtags to trial, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was very interesting because she was the only one, as far as I can tell, that noticed it. I mean, we didn't notice it. She said no one else on the jury noticed it, but she picked it up. So watch out for those shoes.
Yeah, I would not have noticed it at all. I have no clue about any of that. Yeah.
If I had noticed it, I would have pointed at him and made some big deal about it. But
That's cool. All right. So the other thing is, let's talk about another trial you had. I saw on your website. So you did a 9-day jury trial with a $9 million verdict. Was that a fraud case too, or was that just sort of a business dispute type case?
Yeah, no, it was a fraud case. Actually, it had a racketeering component. We got a racketeering verdict in that case.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that was a couple years ago. And in essence, my client had a couple sort of sister businesses, and they were sort of audio in classrooms, sort of a technology solution for classrooms, public schools, and a little publicly traded company in North Georgia, without getting into all the details, just stole his companies. And they did it through a series of online press releases that were false. I mean, they were publicly traded. So, I mean, their SEC filings were false. So it had an element of securities fraud in it. It had an element of just ordinary, regular fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud. And ultimately, we convinced the jury that they had committed crimes to get the racketeering portion of it. So part of it was tripled under the racketeering verdict. So it's actually my second case against the same defendants. I had sued the same people before, and that case that I was involved in came in as evidence in this trial as sort of a pattern of behavior. And what was sort of interesting, there's a lot of interesting things about this case, but I'll give you a little tidbit. So we were getting ready to do the closing argument, and it had not come into evidence, though we had talked about the first case. It had not come into evidence at all that I was the lawyer on the first case. So it was just in the evidence, like there's this other case out there, and there's interacting with the facts of the case. And the closing, we were actually the defendant in this case, believe it or not. So
Wow.
you know, we were on counterclaim. So they got to go first, in their closing, and he got up there and argued that I was the lawyer on the first case, and da-da-da-da-da. And so he sort of introduced this like new evidence. And my trial partner, he said it was like I hit a Super Mario star or something when he said it, because I changed my whole closing and went with a theme, basically, if you don't stop them, they'll do it again. If you don't stop them, they'll do it again. And it was a lot of fun for me. I was very passionate, very mad about these people because they continue to defraud people. I imagine that they're still doing it today, to be honest. So
Okay, so you've sort of found yourself into this fraud niche. How do you market that? I mean, is it through the good verdicts? Or are you out there saying, hey, if you have a fraud case, send it to me? How do people know, hey, it's a fraud case, Jon David's our guy?
So I have been marketing traditionally through relationships my entire career. So up until about a year ago, 90% of our business came in just through relationships, other lawyers in different practice areas would refer cases. I don't know that I was always specifically marketing as like the fraud lawyer, but I would market in real estate disputes and business disputes and other sort of complicated litigation. The last year or so, we've transitioned, which some of your viewers might be interested in, because it's a little unusual in a commercial or real estate-based litigation practice to do digital marketing. We started doing that. It's working to a certain degree. We've started getting more and more clients through that and through reputation. So there's kind of a spectrum. You've got really warm referrals from a person, often another lawyer. You've got really cold people that are finding you on Google. And then there's sort of like a middle ground where people are finding you based upon, reputation or press, and then sometimes I think some of these AIs are picking up some of this stuff. So people are searching. I've heard reports like, give me the top lawyers in this niche. Sometimes my name will come up. I think some of that's geographically based. So it may or may not be true, but that's sort of what I'm saying out there.
All right, you mentioned the digital marketing. Let's dive into that for a little bit. So as you said, my experience and most lawyers I know, at least my generation, for what we do, I would say business litigation is, I'll call it B2B. For the most part, I mean, there's some nuance there, but historically, traditionally, it's a referral, relationship-based type of practice in terms of business development. I guess, first of all, what led you to experiment with some of the digital advertising or whatever it is you're doing?
Well, we started getting more and more phone calls just naturally. I mean, we weren't doing a whole lot of it. We were spending maybe a few $1,000s a year, which is nothing, on digital sort of marketing. Just, we were in, I think, Justia at the time. We had some super lawyers profiles, and that was about it. We did a little organic SEO, but we were spending, $500 a month, and the calls just kept increasing. Occasionally we'd pick out some good cases out of it. We were totally unprepared for to sort of do the intake early on. We probably lost a lot of good cases. But I just woke up one day and said, you know what? I don't know. I think there's something here, because it was happening just 100% organically without us attempting. And I'm of the belief that, you know, as we get older and older, the people that are younger than us, I mean, you're meeting their wives online, you know? So why can't they pick out a lawyer online? You know, sort of an extreme example, but when I was growing up, nobody dated online. I didn't meet my wife there. It was almost like a little bit of a stigma associated with it now, and back then, and now everybody's doing it. And so I think, you know, that's going to be the way a lot of people find their lawyers in the future, and that's what we're seeing more and more of.
That's interesting. I'm not sure. I haven't really talked to a lot of commercial, I'll call it business litigation firms, to know whether they're doing it or not. I'm sure there are folks out there doing it. Have you found that the quality of cases is any different generally? Or do you have to wade through a lot of stuff to get the good ones?
You do. You have to wade through a lot of stuff to get the good ones. You've got to be picky, and you do wind up and get some clients that maybe have unrealistic expectations. So the training's a little different, for sure. But there are a lot of good cases that we're getting through that process. So,
okay, you mentioned intake, which I know the B2C folks know this very well. You turn on the digital ads or whatever it is you're doing, and you're going to get just influx of calls and inquiries. And if you're not set up, it can overwhelm you. So it sounds like early on you guys weren't set up for it. How did you handle it in the beginning, and maybe how has that changed?
Yeah, I mean, when we weren't trying to get cases that way, we just had like a receptionist, sort of office manager answering the phone, and the phone calls just got to be more and more voluminous. So eventually we hired some intake people. We have 2 and sort of a third person in training right now that do intake. That first level, we just try, I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but it seems to be much more personality based, you know, and you can sort of train the skills. You need somebody warm, friendly. You need to be able to give them sort of a script, some guidelines. Our cases are probably a little bit more complicated than a traditional PI firm as far as screening them, because we do have a lot of different practice areas. And then one thing that we've done recently, and this is a little bit of a secret sauce, is that we hired a lawyer to do the next level instead of trying to pass it around internally within the firm. So we have an experienced lawyer who still litigates, but a good part of her day-to-day is taking the next level after the intake has qualified the leads, so to speak. And so they get, you know, the clients get to speak with a real lawyer who has real experience and can really quantify whether the case makes sense or not.
Okay, so it sounds like initial screening, I'll call it, is 1 or 2 or 3 non-lawyers. Then if it makes it through that, it goes to this dedicated lawyer. If it makes it through her analysis, how do you distribute it out amongst your 20 lawyers?
She signs them up, and then we distribute it within the different teams. We have different teams of lawyers with supervisors, and based upon some internal metrics, you know, sort of capacity, what's going on with them. I mean, certain cases are bigger, certain lawyers have skills in certain areas. You know, we've got a little bit of like a bankruptcy practice here that goes one direction. We've got lawyers that we tend to get more of our federal court cases. We've got some lawyers that sort of focus in sort of complex real estate disputes. So there is a little bit of sort of picking and choosing the cases between the teams, but it's sort of based on strengths and natural talent. Yeah.
And I know just from talking to Todd in the past, it was I'll call it a bottleneck or a problem or something he wanted to get out of, and I think you were in it too, where you two are the ones doing the intake and screening the cases, and he felt like it's an overwhelming. He can't do anything else. He can't dedicate time to his actual cases if he's doing this all day. And so I assume this was a part of the natural evolution of we need to get somebody so we can get out and just keep the thing flowing. Is that right?
That's correct. The first people we hired were the first level intake people. Then they would qualify it, and Todd and I were sort of alternating, my partner and I were alternating taking the sales call, so to speak. And it was overwhelming, and it was frustrating the intake people because we couldn't get to it fast enough and really give the level of service. And so we were fortunate to find somebody who had experience that was interested in the position and brought her in, I think, October now. So it's been been 7 months or 7, 8 months. Yeah.
It's really interesting to me, just from talking to owners like you, how you begin to design these systems. And it's really, some of it is, just sort of trial and error. But as you grow, you're like, all right, we'll try this for a while. And you're like, this is just, it's not working. We got to try something else. So you try this new step, and it sounds like this is starting to work. You've turned the dial on a little bit on the digital marketing. So you sort of have, you got the flow coming in, you got the screening process down. Are you now to the place where you're like, okay, if we want, we can turn that knob a little bit, feed some more money into the vending machine, the digital vending machine, and maybe increase the number of leads coming in? Is it reached that point yet?
Not quite, but we're getting close. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out right now, is how to turn up the dial and sort of increase the flow of cases. So still a large number of the cases are coming in, mostly to Todd and I directly. And they sort of, there's a little different sort of system for the way they work. Most of those leads kind of bounce back to us if they're of a certain size to do the actual sales call. So that is still a little bit of a bottleneck, but we're getting close. But the sort of mystery of why the phone rings is not something that I'm an expert in. I mean, we actually hired a fractional chief marketing officer, and I tasked her basically with that. I want to know, why is the phone ringing, and how can I make it ring more? That was like, answer these 2 questions for me. So we just hired her a couple months ago, and we're trying to figure that out. But I will tell you this, for firm owners or other people that are in sort of this situation, and it might be in marketing, it might be in another place, there's a principle that I learned just a few months ago that I try to apply. There's a whole book on it. It's called Who, Not How. And it's a principle out there that a lot of people have espoused, but stop asking how to do something and instead ask who can do this thing has been a much more productive question for me to ask, because I just can't learn it fast enough, and there's no need for me to try to become a marketing expert.
And it's not like you got other things you got to do either, right?
I got to try cases. I got to keep going.
So turning back to your firm, we've talked a little bit about some of the intake issues and some of the growth there. You've got, I think you said 40 people, 20 lawyers. Take me through the growth. I mean, is it the sort of thing that a lot of the growth has been sort of recent over the last year or two? And if that's the case, what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, so we grew a little over 60% last year in 2025. And up until that point, we just kind of grown, a little bit at a time, add a lawyer here, add a person here. Last year, we did have a significant growth spurt. I would attribute it to this. So Todd, my partner, and I co-manage the firm. We have a little bit of division of duties, but we have some overlap. But one of the fundamental things that happened, I believe, was sort of a mind shift for me individually in this. I had built a team of about 10 lawyers that I was working with. I had all the business really I could handle, and I was really overwhelmed, and I had plateaued. My focus had been, up until that point, for whatever, 13 years of practicing law, I want to be the best trial lawyer. I want to get the best cases and go out and be the best marketer. And then it was about building a team. I eventually evolved into building a team around me. But once I got to about 10, I just couldn't go any further, and I kind of hit like a plateau. It was frustrating. I went to a conference, CRISP, who's a legal marketing vendor, kind of coaching company. They put on a yearly conference. And I was really inspired because I saw a lot of other firms a lot bigger. And I thought that they weren't exponentially smarter than me. It was just a different way of looking at it. And I came out with a lot of hope. But the shift was to get off of being successful myself and look at trying to be like success to significance, if that makes sense. In other words, I've got to change my focus from me being the best lawyer, me building a team, me being, a good marketer, to now, all right, what about others? Okay, how can I invest in others? And I shifted and really tried to think, instead of every day, how can I do this or be the best whatever, to now, okay, how can I add value? How can I mentor? How can I lead? How can I inspire? How can I encourage? How can I build up somebody and train them? And that focus led to what I think was a tremendous culture shift in the firm, which is really what I attribute our growth to, is a culture shift. I could talk about this for a while, But I think that when you're in a small firm, and even our size, and maybe forever, I don't know. I mean, maybe even leaders at Apple and Google and the largest companies, in the world are still like this. I think the culture is an expression of the leader's personality, mostly. And my personality was maybe not terrible. I mean, I think there were certain good parts about it, but it was too inward focused, and it limited our growth. I mean, if my lawyers didn't believe that I trusted them with cases, they wouldn't take the ownership. But the moment I stepped back and I was like, all right, let's do it. You take the lead. I'll get out of the way. I'll encourage you. You can do this. And I changed. Then all of a sudden, we had great growth.
That's a great insight. And it's something that I've thought about a lot lately. And it's, we've all heard about what got you here won't get you there. I think you go a little bit further and you say, what got you here will keep you from getting there. And so, through sheer force of will and your just personal performance, you built a team up to 10. And like you said, they've studied how many people you can, manage in a team. And that's, I think, bigger than what they say is ideal. I mean, you just can't do it. You can't do it. You can't, through sheer force of will, go any further. So you're right. I think if you want to keep growing, something's got to change. And not everybody can change. So, good for you that you were able to reflect and say, all right, I got to do something different.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I try to come in every day, and I've learned this from everything I've learned from other people. None of it's an original thought, but I try to come in every day and just ask, how can I add value to my team? How can I add value? I try to ask this personally too, my wife, my kids. It's a good question. I've been telling my kids this for the last few weeks, who are you going to add value to today, as they're scattering out the door with their backpacks. And I try to ask them at night, who'd you add value to? You get in that mindset and you develop that sort of rhythm of thinking, and it's much more fulfilling.
Okay, so along the same line, so we've talked about, let's talk, in the terms of growth, you've got to get the cases in. So we've talked about that. We've talked about now you've got to step back and let the team go. Let's hit the part where how do you build the team? So, how do you find, and we'll focus on attorneys right now, but how do you recruit and find the attorneys to join the team, number one? And I guess related to that, I'm curious if you've found that it has become easier or more difficult the bigger you get. And I ask that because I think if you're really small, maybe people are nervous that you're not stable. And if you get a critical mass, maybe it's easier. So talk me through, how do you find and recruit attorneys?
So I have found that it is definitely easier as you get bigger. When we were smaller, people do have that question. And I want to think maybe one or two even asked us, about job security. Like, are you going to be here? Are there enough cases to go around? Do you have the work to do? As you get larger, I don't think those questions are there as much. And the truth is that it's not as much risk. I mean, objectively, it's not as much risk. You got 3 lawyers, you had 1. I mean, that's 33% more capacity. You got 20, you had 1, it's 5%. I mean, it's mathematically much different. So for us, it feels different. I will say that we still struggle to find great talent, especially talent that has a little bit of experience. We don't necessarily need to hire lawyers with 8 or 10 years, but even finding them with 2 or 3 years worth of experience is a challenge. Our best source of lawyers are our existing lawyers. That is our best source that we found through the years. On average, we have generally gotten 1 solid referral per sort of teammate, per attorney that comes in here. Once they've been here a few months, I mean, they're not going to do it like, 2 weeks in. But once they've been in here a few months, get the culture, make sure, you are what you advertise and you're a decent person, then we generally have found that we could get a referral out of them through their network.
Real quick, if you haven't gotten a copy yet, please check out my book, The Law Firm Lifecycle. It's written for law firm owners and those who plan to be owners. In the book, I discuss various issues that come up as a law firm progresses through the stages of its growth, from just before starting a firm to when it comes to an end. The Law Firm Lifecycle is available on Amazon. Now back to the show. Okay, so another thing I want to touch on, some firms buy a building. And, that's been in a bigger city like Atlanta and New York or whatever. I guess that's less common than the small town and whatever. But that has been an approach you guys have taken. But you haven't just bought one; you've bought two now at this point. But let's talk about the first building. What was the thought process? But then, obviously, as you grow, if you rent, you can blow down a wall, get another floor or whatever. But if you own the building and you outgrow the building, what do you do? And I guess in your case, you said, all right, we'll buy a new building. But tell me about thought process behind it and how the growth has impacted your decisions in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think buying our buildings has been one of the best things that we've done for our firm growth. But I think it can be replicated without buying a building. In other words, it wasn't necessarily the fact that we owned the building that gave us sort of credibility, but it was the fact that we had new space and it was nice and lawyers like new space, and it sort of gave us an air of success, I think. So the first building we bought, I guess it's been about 8 years ago. We were in Decatur renting a space. We cobbled together like 3 different spaces. I mean, sometimes you can't knock down the wall. You got to go down the hall or go upstairs, and that's kind of where we were. And we started looking around, and the truth is, Jonathan, we found a steal of a deal. It was in foreclosure. We bought this building out of foreclosure. It was 2018, 17. The market wasn't great back then. And so we were able to just steal it. We spent some money renovating it, and it did. I mean, when we told and this is where it got us the most credibility, was with potential hires. The clients don't really know. They can see it, so ownership or rental doesn't really matter. But when the prospects to come in and work for us found out that we owned the building, there was some stability, I think, that it brought, especially as we were smaller. And yeah, we bought a new building. My partner and I bought a new building about a year ago, and we moved into it. So we kind of took the next step in that. And that was also sort of just an opportunity. I mean, it was down the road. We paid $65 a square foot for it. I mean, anybody who's renting space, I mean, you can pay, $30, $40 a year for rent in some spaces. So it was a good deal. But I guess that comes from our sort of real estate background, real estate litigation. We kind of know how to find deals from time to time, I guess.
Well, I want to dig more into the building just to give the audience a little bit of perspective, because I do know you guys, you capped out in your old space. I mean, you just couldn't grow anymore. I mean, you filled every little nook and cranny, and you're like, we need a bigger place. And boy, did you guys go big, man. So how many square feet? The building's awesome, by the way. It's just incredible. I want to talk about a few features of it, but how many square feet are we talking about at this building?
The building's 60,000 square feet, 3 floors. Yeah. Big building.
So you got plenty of room. You can grow.
Plenty of room. We don't even have a whole floor yet. So.
Yeah. So you solved that problem. But yeah, so you had your open house, probably multiple open houses, but a couple things that just stand out. You walk in, and I'll let you talk about it, but you walk into the lobby, which is very large and open, and you've got this gigantic dinosaur skeleton. I don't know. You can tell me what the actual dinosaur is, but it's definitely a conversation starter right there in the middle of the lobby. So tell me about the origin of that dinosaur.
Yeah, I'd love to. So it's an Allosaurus replica. A lot of people ask us if it's real, and the answer is no. It's a cast. But I mean, even if you walk into a lot of museums, almost all of the dinosaurs you see, put up together are all cast because the bones are too heavy. But the background is, I took my 4 kids out to a local mall on a rainy weekend, trying to get them, give my wife a break. And there was a gem store, gem rocks, crystal sort of store. It's a little bit unique, but they had one up at the Mall of Georgia here. And that dinosaur was in it, and it was for sale. And this was years ago, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool one day to put a dinosaur in a lobby? That was as far as my thoughts got. And sure enough, a few years later, they had not sold it. Evidently, it's not a hot ticket item. And we were able to buy it and put it in our lobby. So yeah, I've got a picture of my youngest, years ago, with this kind of standing in the head of the thing, it's jaws, so that's the origin, right?
So that's a cool feature of this building. Another cool feature is the little secret speakeasy that you guys built into this thing, which I thought was just so cool, man. So why don't you describe how you get to it, where it is, what it's called?
Yeah, sure. So this was really my partner's idea. He said if I got the dinosaur, he wanted the speakeasy. His cost a lot more, but it was a good deal. So the speakeasy's name is called Allegedly, is what we call it. And there's a secret door. It's off the main lobby, but you wouldn't notice it when you come in. But if you pull a book the right way, then it pops open. You can go in and it's a full bar. There's some AI generated images of the partners, in jail, and some other fun artwork. And it's just a fun spot. We designed the lobby really to function as an event space, not just a place where you walk in. So we've had judicial fundraisers and other parties and fundraisers there. So.
And that's really cool. I mean, if you're going to buy a building and you're going to build it out, why not build it out the way you want it to be, make it interesting? I mean, obviously, I have pictures from the Speakeasy and the Dinosaur I've been showing everybody. I mean, it works, man. People talk about it. So
yeah, that was kind of the idea. It's a little bit outlandish, but maybe get a little chatter about it. So.
And so I've told everybody, if we need to do depositions, we're doing it at your office. So.
Come on, we're happy to do it.
And so to put a wrapper on this building thing. So now that you said it gave you credibility before when you were smaller. What about now when you're recruiting people and you're like, hey, come to our space? Do you find it's helpful, or does it really matter?
Yeah, I think it matters. I mean, I don't really pull applicants, but I still think it gives us a lot of credibility with the applicants to say, all right, you got your own building. We got a little criticism. Maybe it's a little outlandish from some people, but with the Dinosaur. But we're trying to convey a culture, of fierceness, like our website, we fight fearlessly. But that's sort of we're a litigation boutique. We're fighting cases. We're litigating. We're going to trial. I mean, this is the culture. It's a warrior type culture, and I think it helps. I don't think it hurts us for sure.
That's cool. So circling back on your journey. So did you always know you wanted to be a trial lawyer?
I did not. I didn't even know I wanted to be a lawyer at all. One of my favorite stories that I like to tell was my parents had a neighbor, and he was a lawyer. And for whatever reason, when I was sort of in my mid-20s, he just sort of took an interest in me and sort of mentored me. We'd play some games after hours, after work or whatever. And he brought me over his law firm, showed me around. And he was really the encouragement. His name was Marshall Jaffe, for me to be a lawyer at all. And he just believed in me, told me I could do it. I never really considered even going to law school. Nobody in my family had ever gone to law school. Nobody in my direct family had ever been to grad school. And he just believed in me and said, look, man, you can do it. If you want to do it, you're smart, go for it. And isn't it interesting, though? I bet you can look back in your life in a moment or two and say, so-and-so believed in me, and it sort of altered the course of my life. And, I like to tell the story in part because Marshall Jaffe died while I was in law school, kind of in his mid-50s, at a very young age, to honor his memory, because it was a very big turning point in my life. But I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to law school, what kind of law, and I fell into trial work, which everybody, when I was 5 would have known but me, so.
It's interesting you tell the story about Jaffe and these people in our lives that come in, however briefly, and make this impact that can really change the trajectory of our lives. And, on the other side of that, I've experienced people doing that for me, but then I've had people tell me, oh, I remember however many years ago we had this conversation and you said X, Y, and Z. I have no memory of it at all. And we all have those little impacts on people and we don't even know it, which is really, interesting about life, getting deep here. But
no, I mean, I think that's one thing that I try to keep in the back of my mind. You can't really manufacture it, but I think you might be able to increase it by being intentional, trying to look at somebody and maybe observing potential that they don't see yet and believe in them in a way that they don't really believe in themselves yet. I think that's a big part of being a leader and leading a firm, leading a group of people. And it's not just professional, but personal too. I mean, there's a lot going on. And I remember reading something a while back where an author was saying that he imagined 2 scenarios. One where his employee was not treated well and wasn't recognized and wasn't believed in, and how she went home and how she would have interacted with her family, maybe not positively. And on the second hand, he imagined the same employee built up and lifted and encouraged and believed in, and how that person would go home And he made this comment along the lines of, I think that leadership or management is one of the highest callings in life because you get to impact people in a way that few other people can. So I know that's philosophical, but
Yeah.
Let's
dig into that a little bit. You just now you're talking about, and I'll call it mindset. You talked earlier about how you capped out at 10 and you had to change your mindset to continue growing. What other types of mindset shifts have you had to make or that you just made somehow as you personally and as your firm have grown?
So one of the things I've learned is that the first person you have to lead is yourself. So now I'm a litigator. So the way I've sort of viewed this is like a warrior. And I think of it like you got to go to war on yourself. So every day I get up and I have a routine that I go through. I have coaches that are giving me input. I try to get feedback from my team on a regular basis. And I'm looking for things, and it's painful, right? I mean, it's difficult. How can I get better? And I try not to overwhelm myself, but if you just get 1% better every day, I mean, it's like 28 times by the time in 1 year. I mean, that's the math. I mean, just 1% compounded over 365 days, like 28 times better. So I just try to incrementally get better. And one of the principles that I try to live by is to remember that we overestimate what we can do in a day, and we vastly underestimate what we can do in a year. And part of the thing that came out of this sort of life-changing moment, it really was for me about a year and a half ago at this conference, was the desire to grow and that incremental intentionality. And I try to apply it to everywhere. I mean, I got to be more patient, at home. I got to be more intentional with my children. I got to stop drifting in my personal relationships. But it applies to everything. It's holistic, I think, the mindset.
So you mentioned coaches. What types of coaches have you had over the years? I'm a big believer in coaches. I love them. I'm just curious what's worked for you and what have you, where have you taken it?
Do you do coaching yourself? Do you coach people?
Not formally. I mean, if somebody asks me questions, I'll give them advice. Not that it's worth much, but I don't do any formal coaching.
I think you'd be great at it. But I've had a long time coach that sort of specializes in the lawyer sort of arena. So he has a lot of attorneys and managing partners as clients. I've probably been with him for 7 or 8 years. He sort of claims to be sort of a marketing coach, but we've spent almost the entirety of our time spent on leadership issues and employment issues and other types of coaching. Currently, I have probably 4 coaches. So I have a guy who's coaching me on speaking because I'm doing some speaking. I have somebody who's specializing in sort of management and leadership issues. I have this longtime coach that I meet with every quarter. And I just got done doing a coach, like a speed reading coach, actually. So I find if I really want to accelerate my growth in an area, I'll find somebody who's good at it and do 6, 8, 10 sort of coaching sessions with them and run with it. So probably somebody I'm leaving out. It's a little ridiculous, I realize. I'm kind of extreme probably in this area.
Well, it's funny that in some of the circles that, we run in, it feels like everybody has coaches and then you step back and most people don't. It's sort of funny. Probably people listening to this podcast are in the smaller group where, they care about self-development and learning and all these things. All right. So when you're looking for a coach, what's your approach? I mean, how do you find one?
Well, I figure out what I want them to coach me in. I mean, that's the number one thing. I mean, somebody who's good at one thing is not going to be good at another. I mean, you might find somebody who's a real all-star that can coach you sort of broadly. But I want somebody who's kind of been there and done it, who's got some coaching experience in that specific area. I mean, like my speed reading coach, he doesn't know anything about legal marketing, but he knows, how to speed read. So I wanted to learn how to do that. So I look for somebody with expertise. I approach them. I got to be able to respect them as an individual, so they have to have some similar values. But most of the people in the coaching world are really, they've kind of made it. They've kind of had success, and now they're trying to get back. So I find a lot of them to be just great in giving people. So you're kind of, in a way, buying a mentorship relationship is really what I look at it as. And I try to give back to them what I can, but it's certainly them giving more to me. I mean, I'm paying them, but that's the way the advice is going. But a lot, especially if somebody's, in their 60s or 70s and they're doing this, I mean, they're finding real significance trying to pass on their wisdom and their legacy. And I tend to think I've had some, I won't get into it. I've had personal events lately that have had me thinking about legacy. And I think legacy is a little bit more about lessons than it is anything else. That's what we really remember. And that's what coaches are trying to do.
And I'll tell you, I mean, I love coaches. I love the idea of accelerating. I might get there eventually, but hopefully the coach will help accelerate, get me there quicker. You mentioned legacy there. A while back, I had someone on, Scott Zucker. He has a great TED Talk on the legacy letters or ethical wills. Hopefully you're looking at that. If you're not doing it, hopefully that's something you'll do for your kids. You mentioned I think you said 4 kids. Such a gift, whether it's video or written word, whatever.
Well, it's interesting you would say that because I just spent some time, I spent a few weeks thinking about what my dad's legacy was to me. Okay, so my kids are still pretty young, and that's a great idea to do one day, of course. But I spent some time, and I wrote him a letter, actually going through the quotes that I could remember, like, you might be right, but be wrong at the same time. That's a lesson on attitude, all these different things he taught me through the year. I came up with like 12 or 14, and I wrote him a letter, and he said it was the most meaningful thing he had ever gotten. So
that's cool, man. That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
And he's not in great health. He could live another 10 years, but he may not. So I want to get it to him and tell him how much I loved him and what he meant and how I'm passing him down. So
that's a great idea. It's a great idea. So you mentioned, shifting a little bit, you mentioned you got a speaking coach, but you're also, I think you're writing a book. Is that right?
I am. I'm writing a book about fraud. I don't have a title yet, but it's going to be towards victims of fraud and the journey that they go through. It'll have a little sort of pseudo-psychology to it, and we'll have some encouragement. The opening chapters, which we're just about done with, the thrust is really trying to encourage them in the midst of it, because the number one feeling everybody has when they get defrauded is a sense of embarrassment and questioning their intelligence. I mean, they really think like I'm an idiot when it happens. I mean, if you get honeypotted, or you give a bunch of money to somebody. I mean, I had one of my best friend's wives got in that jury scam, where they call you and say you missed jury duty, and she put 15 grand in a Bitcoin machine and sent it somewhere. There's a misconception about fraud victims that they're gullible or that they're not as intelligent or not as educated, and the statistics are that that's not true. Educated people, wealthy people, smart people fall for it. You look at Madoff's scam. I mean, everybody invested with him was wealthy, and everybody leaves thinking that they're idiots. And so that's going to be the thrust, is to say, look, you're not. It could happen to anybody. I've been defrauded, and a lot of people do. They said there was a survey last year that they did, over 50% of Americans had said they had been defrauded, 51%. So I have a book coming out about that probably later this year, and I'm going to be doing some speaking on that topic as well.
And I assume this is not going to be some legal treatise type of a book. This is really for the masses to read. Masses may be the wrong word, but for the regular kind of folk to read, not just some law nerd.
No.
Okay.
It won't have no legal citations, no real law. I mean, it'll have some litigation advice if victims want to consider it about what makes sense, but it'll be big picture and filled with stories, starting off with the briefcase full of cash going to New York.
Well, you do have some good stories to tell. And you can talk about the shoes too now, right?
Yeah, if you want me to, I'll talk about the shoes. So a couple weeks ago, I finished up a trial. Yeah, well, we talked about it, right? So,
yeah, we did. But in your book, you can put that in there.
Well, yeah, I could.
All right, so you're gonna have the book, and then I guess go on the speaking tour. You expect it to be local, or you taking this thing national?
Well, most of it's going to have to be local, but just time wise. But I do have some speaking lined up in September that's in New Orleans, so I imagine it'll be a little bit outside the state.
That's cool. So maybe this is a good time. We've talked a little bit about you're thinking about legacy, you're thinking about becoming a better leader, letting other people step forward. As you sit here today and you're looking forward the next 10, 15 years, how do you see your role in the firm and just in your career maybe changing or staying the same? Where do you see yourself going?
Well, I still want to litigate some cases. I may not litigate them all, and I may sort of raise the bar as to what cases I get involved in. But over the next 10 or 15 years, I'd like to see our firm grow throughout the Southeast, have multiple offices, And I really want us to have a real prominence in this area: deception, fraud, this concentration. My heart is in these cases, I believe, largely because I watched my family go through litigation when I was a teenager and into my 20s. My dad really fell victim to sort of a business fraud. It would have looked, and a lot of people would have just called it sort of business litigation, but at its core, there was deception and fraud. That's really what it was. And I find that to be a real through line in many of the cases. And I have a passion about it because he spent so much time trying to find a lawyer that could do it well. And he ran into lawyer after lawyer that for political reasons wouldn't litigate aggressively, or capability wouldn't litigate well. And even as a young 20-year-old at the time, I could tell these people, they just weren't doing it right. I didn't know how to find somebody, but just watching them. And so I've got a real heart to try to take this out and to add value. It's a core principle of our firm that we try. We're not perfect, but every case that I take, I want to add value to that person. And if I can do that for the large majority of our clients, we'll never suffer for business. And that's our goal. And I tell, we have regular all firm meetings, and that's one of our core principles. Every client, and sometimes it's taking a case, evaluating the case and saying, hey, bud, you don't have a case. Or sometimes it's telling the defendant, look, you did the wrong thing. Let's figure out how to make this right. Let's resolve it. I don't want to take people's money and litigate cases if they're not going to win. And so that's the philosophy I'd like to take larger, because I see a lot of the opposite.
I did not know that story about you and your family. That's interesting, and thanks for sharing. So we talked about sort of your goal for you. You mentioned the firm growing in the Southeast. What does that look like? What do you think that looks like, or what do you imagine that looking like? I mean, is it, you're establishing beachhead offices in other states, or maybe just around the state of Georgia? How would you like that to unfold?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, over the next 10 or 15 years, I'd love us to have 7, 8, 10 offices around the Southeast, maybe even getting outside of the Southeast at that point. We have a goal by 2030 to have 50 lawyers, and that'll probably include at least another location, if not 2 additional locations. Maybe Florida would be first. We're going to try to find a comparable market to Atlanta and the Southeast. There's only a select number of cities, Miami being the most comparable, but it requires sort of a Spanish-speaking firm if you go to Miami, which we might do, but we'd have to add that capacity. Or we might go somewhere like Tampa, where that may not be as vital. So that's sort of the next steps.
I'm sure your kids would love you to open the Orlando office so you can get Disney World a bunch.
That's right. Anywhere near the beach, they'd love. So,
yeah. It's interesting as you explore that, particularly when you cross state lines, it adds complexity just to the operation. So it'll be interesting to see how you guys, how that happens. The other thing I've noticed too, and I've been in a couple firms over the years, that the growth, I'm sure you're seeing this now, and you're probably going to really see it. It's once you hit this almost a critical mass number of lawyers, all of a sudden the firm just starts really growing almost exponentially. Where before you'd add 1 or 2 lawyers, now all of a sudden you're adding 3 or 4 in a chunk, and next thing you know, boom, you're at 50. So I could see you guys getting there pretty quickly. I think you're sort of at that number where it could accelerate extremely fast. So hopefully you're ready.
Hopefully we are. I'm working on myself every day to be ready.
That's cool. Well, all right, last question. We've been going at it for a while. For folks out there that want to start a firm or maybe thinking about growing their firm, any advice you'd have for them?
Yes. Start with yourself. That would be my number one advice. Start with yourself. You need to be better. You need to be committed to getting better. You need to be growing every day and be intentional about it. I mean, every morning you need to get up and think, how can I be better? How can I add value? How can I increase my skills in the areas that need to be increased? And then if you're going to start a firm or you're growing a firm and leading one, I mean, you need to learn to embrace the hard, because it's not easy. You're going to have a lot of criticism, a lot of self-doubt. Just learn to love it like you love working out and, bench pressing that weight and how difficult it is on that last rep, and get up and scream, And then probably lastly, I'd say to people, get a mentor. Get a mentor. Ask. I mean, I I was at the Managing Partners Forum last year, and I met this guy with a much larger firm in New York, maybe 160, 70 lawyers, something like that. And I just shot him an email and said, hey, will you mentor me? And he said, yeah. And so, we've been talking off and on, for a year now, and I've learned a lot from him and a lot of wisdom. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are willing to do it. So find somebody. I mean, don't find the leader of King and Spalding if you're just starting a firm, but find somebody that's a little bit ahead of you and just ask them. Get a mentor and hire a coach too, probably. Both would help you. So
That is great advice. If you don't ask, no one is necessarily going to help you. You got to ask.
that is right.
Now, I will say this. If you ask and they give you, they take interest and they give you advice, these sorts of things, you better do what they say. I mean, if you ignore them and just do nothing, they're not going to remain a mentor very long, right?
That's right. That's right. Gotta do it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Jon David, that's great advice. Thanks for coming on. For people out there that want to get a hold of you, maybe they want to help you open up one of your offices in Florida or somewhere else. So what's the best way to find you?
Man, that'd be awesome. I'd love, if you guys want to join us here, I'd love to find somebody in Florida. You just go right here to our website, wefightfearlessly.com. You can find my profile and email address and everything. So right there.
Awesome. And we'll be looking for your book. Hopefully it comes out by the fall-ish, maybe. So look for that. I think that sounds like a cool book. So anyway, thanks for coming on, Jon David. It's been real fun.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.